So, hello everybody. This is the Caledon Women's Book Club, and we have been going for, it'll be 13 years this September. And we've moved back and forth, but Kara and Janella are founding members with me. And what happened was I moved to Caledon and thought I need to start a book club because that's a good way to get to know people. And so it turned out it was. And then I got involved in the fold, and then Anne and David and I started to do the Authors Book Club. And so that's how we kind of all got to be here. Oh, and then there was a global pandemic. So that was a plot twist. That was a big plot twist. So tonight, guys.
To make it, like, I can see Kelly is driving. Like, that's amazing.
And she was very excited. She worked since 7 o'clock this morning. She works in healthcare services. So we're happy to have her here. So this is, I hope you can see this. So this is Farzana's novel that we're talking about today, 6 Meters of Pavement. It was a One Book, One Brampton Club, right, Farzana? Or was it one of the nominees, or was it the actual winner?
It was a winner in 2017, I think.
I guess for me, the thing that so here we are 2 years later, and I know what Ishmael's great tragedy was his daughter dying in the backseat of the car. And I think everybody who's a parent, it's just on the one hand, it takes your breath away because it is so unthinkable, and yet it is at the same time so thinkable as well, because we all have lived busy lives. We've all done stupid parenting things, inadvertently or whatever. And I was wondering, where did you get that as kind of the catastrophe to start the novel?
Yeah. So I think I read a news article about one of these tragedies. And, one of the things that I really focused on was not just the baby who died, but what it must be like for this parent who made the worst mistake of his life. How do you go on? So that was the conscious inspiration for the book. But there was also a subconscious one that I found out later. I was visiting my father. I was doing a little bit of touring. My father lives in Texas, and so I was down there visiting him. I was doing a little touring. He had read like maybe the first 100 pages of the book. And he said to me, "So, Farzana, did your mom ever tell you that story about when you were a baby?" Apparently, when they were new to Canada, and, stressed as parents are, they left me in the back seat of their car to go furniture shopping. And apparently back then, like, that wasn't a big deal to leave a baby in the back seat of the car. And then he was like, and then we came back and, like, you were in some distress and we had to revive you and you were okay. But when he told me that story, I was like, this is why I wrote such a terrible premise, such a unsellable premise for this novel.
So one of the other things that I'm going back on this memory from ages ago, but it's that Fatima and Ishmael meet in a creative writing class. Mm-hmm. And I am wondering about not just about I guess the power of writing as a way to achieve redemption or self-knowledge, and your thoughts on that. Is that you as a writer imposing some of your feelings about the power of writing, or was that just a convenient plot that you had some knowledge of?
A little bit of both. I had to find a way for Ismail to be able to meet this person who is so different from himself, right? And so I just had to find a convenient way for them to meet. But I do think with every book that I've written, I've kind of been understanding what I'm writing as I'm going, because I'm planning a little bit and I'm revising. So I understand what I'm writing. But one of the things that has happened for me with every book is that at the end of it, I really get a sense of what the book is really about and what I've been trying to work out inside of myself as well. So I'm writing fiction, but there's something that I'm working out, some question, right? And I think that writing helps us to do that. Sometimes it's been way after the fact, like after the book has been published, even, that oh, that's what I was trying to do there. So, yeah. So writing's a great way to do it, even if I have delayed reaction.
So how did you turn psychotherapy into being an author, or was it a vice versa? Like, how did that all come together for you, and
Yeah.
what are your other projects? Which is two entirely different questions. I'm sorry.
Well, I have always written. Like, I was always a very creative child. I was like the kid who, performed plays every time the relatives were over. Like, I was very, very active in all of that. But, I come from an immigrant family, and, immigrant families are all about like find stability, buy yourself a home, all the very kind of standard stuff. And so art is a hobby. Music is a hobby, writing is a hobby, all of that is just a hobby, and you're supposed to really focus on your career. And so I did that. I kept writing in little bits and pieces and went to school. I ended up doing a master's in social work because I also have an activist head, and I wanted a job in which I could be doing social justice things at the same time. So I ended up going and becoming a social worker, writing a little bit on the side. And then I went through a terrible breakup. And when you go through a terrible breakup, you have all of these swaths of like empty time. So I had to fill it, I was desperate to fill it. So I ended up taking a couple of continuing ed courses at U of T. And one of them, the second one, was called Writing the Novel. And it was in that class that I wrote the first chapter of my first novel, and then just wanted to keep going and keep going and keep going. And eventually I quit my job, went into private practice so I could have more time to write. So the writing was always kind of there calling me. And the social work stuff kept me afloat. And today how it works is I try to write, the whole morning, and then around 2-ish, I'll start seeing clients, and that's been very good to me. It's very helpful as a writer to have part-time work that pays your bills, that doesn't drain all of your writing energy. And psychotherapy is a very sacred kind of job. Like, you're working with people and their hearts, and it's very fulfilling. It's very fulfilling. And I have a dream of, over time, I've been reducing the amount of psychotherapy I'm doing and increasing the writing time, which is great. And so I have a dream to keep doing that, to, increase book sales and writer income, so that one day I can, just see maybe, I don't know, a few clients a week for fun, and the writing will be the main thing.
Farzana, one of the things that I was thinking of immediately about your style was that it reminded me of Jan Martel, maybe Rohinton Mystery, Michael Ondaatje, just that there was these layers of complexity. And then, as everybody's been saying, then these moments of real detail and almost like silence where you're describing things. But I'm just projecting those ideas on there. Who are your writing influences? Who do you like to read?
I would say back then with this book, I was reading a lot of Zadie Smith. What I really like about her is that she can talk about very serious things and infuse humor, and I tried to do that. She also has a way of like giving you a hard thing and then lightening up for a bit and hard. And so I was thinking about that because there's some really hard things in here. I was reading a lot of M.G. Vasanji back then, so there might be some of his. The thing about doing third person POV is that you can do some of what Tony was saying. Like you can have you can talk about memories being sly, right? You can't do that as much with like first person.
Right.
Who else was I can't remember who else I was reading back then, but I read a lot, and I just try to keep up. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances in CanLit, so I just, try to read as much as I can, and I pick up things along the way. I think that's one of the best ways to become a better writer. Yeah, so Seven's coming out September 5th. I have a launch, we're calling it the Canada launch, although it's like all virtual, so anyone from anywhere can attend. But the Canada launch is September 17th at 7 o'clock. And all of that information will be on all my social media and stuff. So please come to that. And so Seven was a book that I started in 2015, in late 2015. So what it's about, I'll just give you the little blurb and then I'll talk about the process. So it's about a 40-year-old Indo-American, they live in New York, woman who has had an emotional affair before the book starts. And she and her husband go on a kind of a marriage-saving trip to India. He has a sabbatical happening. He's an academic, and they take their 7-year-old daughter. And she thinks she's decided to quit her job. She's a teacher. And during this year, she's decided that she's going to focus on homeschooling her kid in India and doing some research about her great-great-grandfather. But what ends up happening while she's there is that there are these big debates happening within her community, which is the community I come from, the Dawoodi Bohra community. It's a very insular subsect of Shia Muslims. Within this community in 2016, there's this big debate happening about a practice called khatna that Western feminists call female genital cutting. And she has two cousins who are on the opposite sides of this debate, and she's like trying to grapple with it and figure out where she stands on the whole issue. So that's sort of the overarching theme. Most of it is in her first person POV. And interspersed in all of it are little scenes from her great-great-grandfather. So he ends up being kind of a secondary character in a less dominant way in the book. And some of what inspired that book is that years ago, my father told me about this. We have this sort of famous ancestor in our family who has this real rags to riches story. He grew up, our community is from this tiny village called Dholka. And so he came to Mumbai, which was called Bombay back then, with his mother, penniless. He didn't have any education. He was a young boy at the time, and he basically was working as a servant in a richer family's home. But he was a smart kid, and he ended up teaching himself how to read and write in Hindi, and then he also taught himself how to read and write in English over time. And he was the sort of person who bought businesses that ended up being really successful. He bought land that was like worthless, that became really valuable, and so he amassed this great fortune. So of course he's like this mythical figure in my family's history. So I went around doing research with my family in North America and a few people in Bombay as well to get some research about him, to find out who he was. And mostly no one had met him. Nobody had met him. So it's all like secondhand stories of people saying, well, my grandfather told me this story about him, and so on. And there was a lot of myth. And as I was learning about him, I learned that he, over time, had 4 wives. 2 of them had died in childbirth. Third one he had divorced, which was like, what? You know, you don't do that in those times. It's like 1900. And then the last one outlived him. And so I got very interested in his story, but I couldn't get any real details about who he was as a person. There just isn't that information available. There wasn't anything that didn't make him look like a hero. And I knew that that was only a piece of the story, and I knew that the wives were missing. So I started thinking about him as a fictional character. So he's the great-great-grandfather who appears in the story. And then the other story with Sharifa is that I have been an activist around these issues since 2015. I joined a group called We Speak Out. And so I've been very, very like involved in my community and looking at this practice, which in my community is just thought to be a regular kind of thing. Like our high priests, who are like the most corrupt people on earth, say, you know, this is a necessary practice and no one is allowed to question it. It's a bit like a cult. And so people continue this awful practice. So it blends some of my activism as well as some of my imaginations about an ancestor, and a little bit of like all the stories I've picked up along the way about women in my community.
I think one of the things I would almost like you to talk about next, and only because I also know Anne as the host could also speak to this, is the incredible time arc that is involved in producing a novel. Because most people, I don't think, appreciate or can understand the fact that novels are a 3 to 5 year process between writing and editing and agenting and publishing and arcing and all of the things that happen. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, and probably the incredible patience in your body because of how crazy it is.
There is a lot of waiting. You know, I started writing it at the end of 2015, and I think I had finished it pretty much like a good first draft by the beginning of 2017. But then I began the process of looking for a new agent, which took time, you know, because people take a lot of time to get back to you. And then once I had my agent, she began the process of trying to sell it. And that takes a lot of time because people take a long time to get back to you. So we probably had there was probably at least like a year and a half of agent publisher period of waiting. And then once you get to the publisher, you're waiting, like, unless you're, you know, Margaret Atwood or somebody, I think the vast majority of us are probably put in a queue, and we're waiting about a year. And that's because there's other books in the queue, but also because there's a lot of moving pieces. Like, you're first working with an editor, and then a copy editor, and then later on the sales people come in and the marketing people come in. So like it all has to line up in their schedule. So yes, it's a long, long process. Like, I think the advance review copies started to go out in December. And they also like to have an 8-month process for that, because they need it to get out to reviewers and festival folks who often have long lead times. Like the media has a very short lead time. They want things like the month before a book comes out, but often reviewers want it way, way before, and festivals. So yes, there's a lot of waiting. So most people are working on a couple of projects at the same time. So as soon as I entered into one of my waiting phases, so probably when I was looking for an agent, I started focusing on the YA novel. And then I would work on the YA novel. And then as soon as the book came back with some, Seven came back with some feedback, then I went back and revised Seven. And then I waited, while I was waiting, then I worked on the YA.
One of the things that I find so interesting is, having the privilege I do to work with so many authors and the festival and the Authors Book Club, is that I don't think authors get enough credit for being the canary in the coal mine, if for that metaphor, in that, you're prescient in terms of often throwing issues to us that have been lurking in the background, and all of a sudden they're at the forefront of our society, and your book's there. But then I know from my experience that but you were talking about that 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, and it seems like you're just on top of trend now. But in fact, you were before the trend. I mean, I'm thinking of like even Lawrence Hill's Illegal, where he's talking about Syrian refugees, but he wrote that and published it just as the Syrian refugee thing was coming to light. But that meant that he was on it 3 years before that. And so when you're hearing you talking about female genital mutilation, like that is more to light now. But when you were first talking about it as an activist, it was still lurking quietly in the shadows. And I think that authors and artists don't get enough credit for that kind of.
You know, one of the things that I think is so interesting is we do become these mini experts on whatever the topic is that we're trying to address, right? Like we're just trying to write really good, beautiful novels, but we end up, because you've got to do so much research on the particular issue and the topic, like I still get people sending me articles about hot car deaths. And this book came out in 2011, and I'm like, yeah, I know. Right? Then they were like, you wrote about that. I'm like, yeah, I know. And I've been thinking about, hot car deaths since 2007. So you do become a bit of, and these issues have been around forever, but you become this mini expert on this one topic. Then you put out the novel, and then you're like, well, I'm moving on to my next thesis, right? So I no longer read about hot car deaths because, that was a long time ago. I no longer read about all-inclusives. That was my last novel that came out in 2015. But people are like, hey, read this thing about all-inclusives. I'm like, I already did that, right? So I think that probably in a few years, I might be like, I don't want to talk about female genital mutilation anymore, because you really, you get so immersed in the topic. It just sort of takes over your life.
I'd like to talk a little bit about genre just because, so how have you found shifting because all of your other novels have been for adult readers. How have you found shifting your craft and your writing for a young adult audience? And have you found that a challenge, or has it been a natural fit for this particular plot line? How does that work?
I think it was a little bit hard because it is a shift, but that's what my project is for that novel is, can I shift genres now? Like, what's that going to be like? And I like reading YA. So I thought, let me try this. That book is inspired by, there was one year of my life when I ended up at a boarding school, and it just was it stands out in my teenage years as like the weirdest year of my teenage life. And so I had a lot of fodder and it's fiction. I have a character that is like a version of 16-year-old me, but it's all fiction. But there were these little moments, right, that I could say, oh, I'm going to build a scene around that. And, oh, I remember that movie. I'm going to build a scene around them watching that movie. So I was really mining my own 16-year-old's memories. So that was the way in for me. And then I also needed to work really hard. Like I got some feedback from my agent early on, and she said, like, would a teenager say that? And I was like, oh, no, that's what a 49-year-old would say. So I had to go back and think, how would this be experienced and talked about if, like, what did I know when I was 16? And what did I not know? And what did I think I knew about? I thought I knew everything. So there was a lot more of that. What would it be like if I was a very different age?
So as we close, is there anything, we're a book club, and the whole point of the Authors Book Club is, of course, to support this relationship between Canadian writers and Canadian readers. Do you have any great insights or anything you would like to say along those things? How do we protect Canadian writers, and how do we connect them to Canadian readers, and how important do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important. It's writing is a bit of a difficult, it's a wonderful thing to do, but it's also difficult because the opportunities to promote work are, they're not scarce, but they're limited, right? So there's only so many awards that can be won. There's only so many festival opportunities. There's only so much book review space available. And so you can have a really terrific book and it might go nowhere because maybe you're not good at promoting, or maybe you just, you're at the wrong time. One of the things that happened for 6 Meters, I think, it did well in terms of it got shortlisted for the Toronto Book Prize and all of that. But it was really in 2017 that I think some of the issues were issues that people were wanting to talk about, particularly around queer youth. So sometimes you're just at the wrong time with your book. And so what I would say is if you like, do what you're already doing, read Canadian authors. If you like a book, help promote it, like, write about it on social media. Reviews are super important. You can have a really good book, and there can be some really mean people on Goodreads who will like read the first 10 pages and give it a 1 star because they were just like bored in the first 10 pages, and then you have this really low star rating. So review the books in some of those places, give it the stars, and tell all your friends, all of that kind of stuff. You probably do all those things anyway.
No, I think I think you're right. The social media and just having an account on Goodreads or Amazon or Indigo and saying this was a really good book. My book club, we really enjoyed it. And the other thing I think that you missed, not because, is that if you don't have the means to purchase it, ask your library to buy it, right? Because that's an important thing to do.